In the terrifying world of horror, some characters stand head and shoulders above the rest, and Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th franchise is right up there. For those who've been out of the loop, imagine a towering figure, always sporting a hockey mask that has become synonymous with terror. But Jason's first life was short and miserable. As a kid, he was assumed to have drowned at Camp Crystal Lake, and years later, his camp cook turned killer mom goes on a killing spree in his memory. But wait, Jason didn't stay 6 feet under. He rises from the grave, and he's not very happy. He comes back from the dead, and is on a constant hunt for anyone who dares to set foot in Camp Crystal Lake. Think of him as the horror version of the Terminator, but with a machete. Unstoppable, unkillable, and always coming back for more. So in this video, we'll explore 15 slasher villains who in their own right were spine-chilling, but wouldn't stand a chance against Vorhees, the OG in the genre. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Michael Myers. While Jason and Halloween's Michael Myers were both silent and eerie, and have left a trail of bodies in their wake, who would come out on top if they went against each other? Michael Myers was a persistent force of destruction who always returned to his childhood home in Haddonfield, Illinois to wreak havoc. He'd survived everything from gunshots to stabbings, but a curse drove his killing spree. With a focus that was laser sharp, his reign of terror was mostly limited to Halloween night. However, unlike Michael, Jason wasn't tied to a specific date. The connection to Friday the 13th was more of a symbolic nod to the day he drowned as a kid. Jason had superhuman strength and incredible resilience. Despite his decaying body, he kept coming back stronger. Water might be his Achilles heel, but being undead, he powered through. He was a year-round menace and haunted the woods around Camp Crystal Lake. While Michael was nearly indestructible, he couldn't compete with Jason's raw power and relentless drive. Jason's ability to brush off injuries and make his own decisions gave him the upper hand. Also, Michael had been killed off in his series, and it seems like the franchise is moving on without him. But Jason is still out there, ready to strike fear into the hearts of unsuspecting victims. So who's the winner? If you ask me, with his unstoppable strength and independence, Jason Voorhees takes the crown. And when it comes to unstoppable villains, he may have no peers. Leatherface. Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with his terrifying mask made from the faces of his victims, was a sight that could stop you dead in your tracks. His weapon of choice was a chainsaw that he wielded with utter brutal force. But when it came to a face-off with Jason Voorhees, he might just need more than his chainsaw. Leatherface was a product of his horrifying upbringing. You know, not the kind of family who had Sunday morning breakfast together. Instead, he was raised in a family that turned murder into a ritual. His strength was born out of madness and desperation, but Jason Voorhees was a different ballgame altogether. Jason possessed supernatural strength and has been through it all. Drowning, electrocution, explosions, even a trip to space, and yet he kept coming back like a bad flu. As an undead entity, he was practically invincible. Leatherface's chainsaw, as terrifying as it was, would barely slow Jason down. While Leatherface relied on raw, chaotic violence, Jason was methodical. Despite his terrifying mask and chainsaw, Leatherface had a human side. He experienced fear, pain, and confusion. Jason, however, was different. Hidden behind his hockey mask was an emotionless killer. When it came to their hunting grounds, Jason had the advantage. Leatherface was a terror in his own home, where he knew every nook and cranny. But Jason was a master of the wilderness who stalked his victims with almost supernatural ease in the vast forests of Camp Crystal Lake. In a direct confrontation, Leatherface's manic violence would be no match for Jason's unwavering strength and supernatural resilience. In the end, even armed with his chainsaw, Leatherface would be doomed against Jason Voorhees. The Creeper. The Creeper was an ancient demon on a morbid mission to replace his damaged organs with fresh human ones. Every 23rd spring, for 23 days, he hunted and smelled people's fear to find himself the most delectable parts. He could fly, regenerate limbs, and had heightened senses. But his power was time-bound, which meant he could only kill for 23 days, and that made him vulnerable most of the time. Jason Voorhees, on the other hand, was a punishing nightmare. He didn't have a beauty-sleep cycle to follow, or a set hunting period. The slasher villain didn't need a break, you see. He was always on the prowl and ready to kill. His superhuman strength, his unmatched resilience, and let's not forget his immortality. That was his USP. Although the Creeper's ability to regenerate was impressive, it was certainly no match for Jason's healing powers. Jason was nearly indestructible and recovered from injuries almost instantly. The Creeper might be quicker in his moves, but any damage he inflicted on Jason would be healed in a blink. However, any harm Jason caused Creeper would stick and force the Creeper to go human parts hunting. While the Creeper was a terror in his own right, he simply couldn't keep up with Jason's undead card and constant readiness to kill. Victor Crowley. The Hatchet series was set in the hauntingly eerie world of Louisiana Bayou, where we encounter the horrifying legend of Victor Crowley. But Victor wasn't always the slasher as we know him. His story was a heartbreaking one. Born deformed, he was kept hidden away by his father. One fateful Halloween, a cruel prank to draw him out spiraled into disaster when his house was set ablaze. In a desperate attempt to save him, his father accidentally killed him with a hatchet while trying to break down the door. This tragic event brought Victor back as a vengeful spirit, who now haunted the Honey Island swamp and brutally killed anyone and everyone who dared to trespass. Victor didn't just kill with a simple hatchet blow. No, it wasn't satisfying enough for him. He preferred a more bloody approach, say ripping out the intestines and hacking off limbs. Victor's power was linked to the swamp, which made him ghoulish within its boundaries. But since he has never been outside the swamp, it strongly suggested that his strength and invincibility were tied to that cursed place. If he were to leave, he might lose his supernatural abilities and become vulnerable. Now, let's turn our attention to Jason Voorhees. Unlike Victor, Jason wasn't confined to one place. He has spread terror from Crystal Lake to the far reaches of outer space, all while maintaining his deadly touch. Jason's strength was supernatural, which made him nearly invincible. His quick healing and immunity to pain gave him a significant edge. While Victor drew power from the eerie swamp, Jason was unstoppable wherever he roamed. Victor was brutal, no doubt, but his limited tactics would falter against Jason's combat style. While Victor depended heavily on his victim's fear and psychological terror, Jason felt no hesitation, no remorse. He was a silent, methodical killer whose sole purpose was to annihilate anyone in his path. In the swamp, Victor Crowley was certainly someone you wouldn't want to cross paths with, but Jason Voorhees was ready for his kill anywhere, anytime. In this monstrous face-off, Jason Voorhees comes out on top. Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger's life story was as eerie and twisted as they come. He was born to a nun who suffered a terrible assault by over 100 mentally unstable individuals. His childhood was anything but normal. As he grew older, he became a child killer in Springwood, which earned him the title of the Springwood Slasher. Not exactly a career move anyone would aspire to. But his reign of terror was cut short. He was caught, but due to a legal loophole, he walked free. This didn't sit well with the parents of his victims. They tracked him down to his hideout, a boiler room, drenched it in gasoline, and set it on fire. This incident left Freddy with his trademark melted face. But Freddy wasn't done. He came back as a dream demon, who was dead set on haunting and controlling the dreams of Springwood's children. In the dream world, Freddy was almost invincible. He could transform into anything he wanted, and if he killed his victims in their dreams, shockingly, they died in real life too. But here's where Jason Voorhees outshines Freddy. Jason was an undead killing machine who didn't play by the same rules as Freddy. His reign of terror wasn't confined to a specific place. He caused chaos everywhere. Freddy's powers in the dream world were indeed impressive, but outside of it, he was vulnerable and human. This weakness was exploited in the clash between Freddy and Jason in the movie Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy tricked Jason into resurrecting him. Jason's killing spree stirred up enough fear in Springwood to allow Freddy to haunt the town's dreams once again. But Jason, being the tenacious killer we already know him to be, started eliminating Freddy's potential victims, which obviously didn't sit well with Freddy. This led to a face-off between the two horror legends. In the end, Jason emerged victorious and proved his status as the ultimate horror villain. Freddy might rule the dream world, but in the real world, Jason was the undisputed king. Jigsaw. John Kramer, better known as Jigsaw from the Saw series, was a mastermind of psychological games. His traps weren't just physical, but tested the human spirit. Despite being just an average Joe, his terminal cancer diagnosis shifted something in him. With nothing to lose, he had all his chips in the game. He never dirtied his hands. Instead, he was all about the mind games and preyed on people's deepest fears. On the other hand, Voorhees was the strong silent type. No riddles to solve with him, just a disfigured presence in a hockey mask and a machete that did all the talking. His approach was straightforward. See? Slash. Immune to fear and pain, Jason had an unyielding drive to slash through any obstacle. While Jigsaw was the chess player, always several moves ahead, Jason was a wrecking ball, slashing and smashing. Both are scary in their own right, but they couldn't be more different. One had the brains, while the other had pure muscle and intent to kill. But truth be told, Jason Voorhees remains the undisputed champ of slashers. FYI, the guy was unkillable, and who could stand his ground against the Walking Dead man? A mere mortal, and that too with cancer. You gotta be kidding me. Hannibal Lecter. Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The guy was a genius, but not in a good way. An intellectual shrink, but with a dark hobby. He was the type who could make a fortress feel like a trap with just smarts. A master manipulator who could get inside your head and make it his own playground. He was sharp, real sharp, and was the kind of guy who struck fast and hard when you least expected it. So a cunning cannibal? Oh, did I mention that Hannibal was a cannibal? Yes, add it to the list. A cultured cannibal versus gigantic malformed zombie hillbilly. But Hannibal was flesh and blood just like the rest rest of us. Voorhees was like a horror movie boss who never took a break. Hannibal liked to take his time and needed everything just in place to pull off his deadly performances. But Jason? He was all about the here and now. So if these two were ever to clash, my money's on Jason. Hannibal might be all cool and brainy, but Jason's the kind of guy who didn't even know what fear meant. He had a one-track mind. See, chase, repeat. Hannibal might be a predator, but against Jason, he's just another prey. The Babadook. The Babadook was like the ultimate creep from your worst nightmares. It crept around and made you see things and feel things. Played on your fears like a pro, much like that one bad dream that kept you up at night, but a million times worse. Or like that one person who knew exactly what to say to get under your skin. Except it wasn't just talk, it was your deepest, darkest emotions. So, Babadook clashing against Jason Voorhees does sound like a mismatch made in horror heaven. Well, why, you ask? Because the Babadook played mind games, and Jason, well, was Jason. Really not the type to sit down for a game unless it was the kind of game of who slashes the most. He was not about those psychological shenanigans. He was all about action, and not the kind you want to be on the receiving end of. His only goal in life was to chase you down. Pure mayhem. The Babadook might be the one when it came to scaring you silly, but against Jason's muscle and barbaric ways of killing? No, not even close. It's not even a contest. The Babadook's got his own turf, sure. He likes to stick to the shadows, the corners of your house, the edges of your mind, but Jason was everywhere. Wood, city, even outer space. There was no limit to where he could go for his kill. Jason would be out there, not stopping, not slowing down, just doing his thing until there's nothing left of Babadook. Ghostface. Imagine getting a call and hearing that eerie question, "What's your favorite scary movie?" That's when you know Ghostface is on the other end, ready to play a deadly game. Ghostface from the Scream movies was a mastermind, and used horror movie rules to outsmart the prey. Ghostface wasn't just one person. Behind that freaky mask was a different person each time, each with their own messed up reason for going on a killing spree. And that's what kept you guessing who was going to jump out next. Ghostface was all about the mind games. They might not be the muscle-bound type, but their smarts make them a real slippery foe. Remember Billy Loomis? He was the first to don the mask, and he left quite the impression. Now pick Ghostface against Jason Voorhees, and suddenly Ghostface would be out of their league. Well, it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. No wait, a tank fight. Ghostface might be the king of creeps with their phone pranks and shadow lurking, but Jason only needs to land a couple of heavy hits, and you can say it's lights out for the master of disguise. The thing is, Ghostface was driven by personal beef or some sick game, which meant they could get sidetracked or thrown off their game. Jason, though, had only one thing on his mind, and he won't stop for anything or anyone. While Ghostface loved to plan and play with their victims' heads, Jason was not one for chit-chat. He was all about the chase and the kill. No amount of Ghostface sneaking around would save them from Jason's carnage. And that iconic knife Ghostface wields, it was pretty much like a toothpick to Jason's machete. Candyman. Candyman had this tragic vibe that made him more than just your regular slasher. Don't get me wrong, he was a slasher, but also a tragedy that came back to life to haunt people. He was like the ghostly result of a dare gone wrong. The man we knew as Candyman was Daniel Robitaille, an artist who paid a terrible price for love. His brutal end, smeared with honey and stung by bees, transformed him into the Candyman, a spirit out for revenge. You say his name 5 times in front of a mirror, and bam, he was there with his hook in his hand and tattered cloak, ready to settle scores. His whole deal was that he was powered by his own legend and the sheer terror he sparked in everyone. But Voorhees wasn't the kind of boogeyman who had to wait for an invite, or as a matter of fact needed one. He was always on the prowl, hardly catching a break. Candyman might have the whole spooky summoning thing down, but Jason had raw power and an unstoppable determination. While Candyman needed people to believe in him to do his thing, Jason wouldn't care about your beliefs. He had his priorities straight. See, chase, kill. No amount of Candyman's spooky legend stuff was going to work on Jason. And just so you know, I tried to steer clear of saying his name too much, if you know what I mean. Wouldn't want to accidentally roll out the red carpet for a nightmare, especially when everyone's trying to have a good day, right? Frankensteins Monster. Let me put it out there first. The big guy with the bolts in his neck? Well, that's not Frankenstein. That was Frankensteins Monster. Victor Frankenstein was a real genius with a few screws loose in his head. How else would you explain stitching together a giant from spare human parts? God complex much? And what a nightmare to remember when a lightning bolt breathed life into the creature. But the thrill of playing God fizzled out fast for Victor, who bolted in terror from his own handiwork. Now, this monster was not incompetent. He's tossed folks around like rag dolls, made mincemeat out of lab gear, and could turn a sturdy door into splinters without struggling. Think of him as the guy who's had one too many bad days and finally snapped. Being dead already, he laughed off bullets and blades like flies he could just swat off. Sure, you could try to lop up a limb or go for the head, but good luck slicing through that beefy build, especially with all that juice flowing through him. But he's not Superman. Let's not forget his body was a bit of a patchwork, so it had its weak spots. On the silver screen, Frankenstein's monster started off more misunderstood than evil, but as time ticked by, he transformed into the poster boy for horror. So while Jason, the machete-wielding maniac, and Frankenstein's monster are both undead, between you and me, let's get real. Deep down, the monster had a heart, but all Jason had was his machete, his wickedness, and a strength that made Frankenstein's monster look like child's play. Samara. I bet you remember Samara from the movie The Ring. Terrifying, right? Watch the tape, get a creepy phone call, and in 7 days she was crawling out of your TV screen to claim your life. Her tragic past fueled her vengeful spirit. She fed on people's fears. Now Samara's game was all about the spook factor. She was like a ghostly puppet master who pulled strings to freak you out until you were ripe for the picking. But then there's Jason Voorhees. He was not about that life. Fear? Never heard of it. Remorse? Not in his vocabulary. He was a walking, stalking, remorseless killer with a one-track mind. Kill, kill, kill. Let's just say Jason watched that creepy video and his 7-day countdown was up. Samara began her usual routine and crawled out of the TV, but she was met with Jason's unblinking stare. Her whole game was about fear and messing with your mind. But Jason doesn't do fear, and he definitely doesn't give up. Sure, Samara might be a tough cookie for most, but against Jason's iron will and supernatural toughness, she wouldn't stand a chance. Samara's spooky vibes and scare tactics wouldn't even make him flinch. Samara's creepy Crowley act might work on your average Joe, but against Jason, it's a definite no-go. He's the king of the horror hill, hands down. Chucky. Dolls have always given me the heebie-jeebies, and yes, even the cute ones. You know the type, with those glossy peepers and almost lifelike looks. Now, there's one that's a cut above the rest. Chucky. Sure, he had charm and one-liners, but let me tell you, this little guy was bad news. Chucky was more than just a chatty toy. He had a dark side, all thanks to being the new home of Charles Lee Ray's spirit. Ray, a serial killer who dabbled in voodoo, pulled off a last-minute soul swap to dodge death, and voila, Chucky was born. But don't let his pint-sized stature fool you. Chucky had the strength of a full-grown dude. This doll could shake off death like it was nothing. Burned, shot, blown to bits. He's been through it all and keeps coming back for more. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Plus, he had this freaky party trick where he could hop his soul into other dolls. But Chucky was not exactly a supernatural phenomenon. He was resilient, sure, and that soul-hopping thing is pretty wild. We could give him that, but that's about it. He was hilarious and a bit of a smart aleck, but when push came to shove, he was not invincible. His tiny frame was a bit of a handicap, and if you were onto his game, he was not so tough. Chucky was the kind of villain you love to hate. He had a wicked sense of humor and was eerily terrifying. But in terms of sheer might or ghostly powers, he was not exactly the cream of the crop. But Jason was like the superhero of horror if superheroes were super into slashing instead of saving. Chucky was crafty and could catch you off guard, but if Jason was ready for him, which I'm sure he would just be a small problem. The Fisherman. It's really impossible that if we're talking about horror villains, we don't even mention Ben Willis, aka the Fisherman from I Know What You Did Last Summer. Yes, I know the Fisherman doesn't sound like a murderous slasher on a maniac killing rampage. Well, his story kicked off with a nightmare scenario, a hit and run that he miraculously survived, only to come back with a vengeance. Armed with his hook, slicker, and hat, he was out there to make those careless teens pay. The Fisherman was no amateur. He was the shadow in the corner of your eye, the whisper in the dark alleys. He was the master of the long game and used fear and guilt to torment his victims until they begged for no more. His strength and sneakiness were remarkable, but Voorhees, the legend of Camp Crystal Lake, had already faced the worst. Fire, water, electricity, explosions, you name it. So when you stacked them up, the Fisherman's hook seemed almost too laughable next to Jason's machete. Jason didn't just hurt, he obliterated his prey. And while Ben Willis was tough, he was still flesh and blood. For Jason, you could say he was like a horror movie monster mashup. All the best parts rolled into one. While the Fisherman's mind games were spectacular, Jason was all about the end game. He was not one for theatrics, but definitely believed in getting things done, if you know what I mean. Nothing fancy, but certainly fatal. So if there was a horror hall of fame, Jason's picture would most probably be way before the Fisherman. Norman Bates. Norman Bates from the movie Psycho, and the unassuming owner of the Bates Motel was sort of a horror legend. He was the guy who started it all, the original slasher. He had a quiet charm that lured you in, and a twisted mind that struck when you were least expecting it. Norman had this double life where he dressed up as his dear old departed mom and went on a killing spree. And yes, you remember that chilling shower scene? That's Norman at his most terrifying. Norman had a creepy charm, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. He would be the last person you would expect, as he won over guests with his shy smile. His whole whole MO was catching folks off guard when they were at their most vulnerable. But you see, Norman was not invincible. He had his tricks and surprises, but he was still just a man. A man with a dark side, sure, but a man nonetheless. But Voorhees didn't need to play mind games or hide behind a creepy sly smile. He was just out there, literally, to plow through anything in his path. And let's not forget, he was an undead killing machine. That's not something Norman could compete with. So while Norman Bates was a legend with a knife, my money's on Jason every time. Marvelous verdict. In the horror world, villains come in all shapes and sizes, but only a few become legends. And let's face it, Jason Voorhees is a legend with a capital L. With more body count than Michael Myers and Freddy, he was the MVP of the league. Jason was the strong silent type, but his machete does plenty of talking. He was not just a mindless monster, but had his own twisted sense of moral compass, even if we can't make heads or tails of it. He steered clear of animals and kids, which is kind of touching in a twisted way. It was like there was a piece of that drowned kid still in there somewhere, which made him a bit more complex than your average boogeyman. The guy had been through hell and back, and every time he comes back stronger. So who's the king of the horror hill? Is it Michael Myers with his creepy mask, or Jason with his never say die attitude? If you're up for a debate, I'm game. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.